Hi, everyone, and welcome to Let's Schmooze. I'm Doug Ebach, the original screenwriter for the movie Sweet Home Alabama. Each month, I bring on guests for a discussion of topics relating to writing for various entertainment media. Today, I have some great guests who write for television animation. I have Steve Melching, who is best known for X-Men, the animated series, Batman, the Brave and the Bold, Transformers Prime, Star Wars Clone Wars, and Star Wars Rebels. I also have Shaene Siders, who has written for such shows as Niko and the Sword of Light, DC Superhero Girls, and Netflix's Saint Seiya. All right, so I'm going to start off with the question that pretty much that always gets asked in all of these kind of things, which is, how did you get into the business? Although this, I suspect, may be a little different because I'm guessing that maybe not both of you intended to write animation when you first decided to come into the business. So maybe how you got into animation is an interesting story. So let's start with Steve. Why don't you tell us how you got?
Sure. Well, I grew up in the 70s and 80s during a time when, the networks reigned supreme for animation. You had your Saturday morning cartoons was sort of a staple of growing up. And I loved watching the cartoons. But, to be completely honest, a lot of them weren't very good. There was a lot of great classic ones like the Warner Brothers Looney Tunes that I loved. And there were a lot of shows during that period that I had a lot of affection for and that I watched regularly, but it wasn't something I aspired to do. I wanted to be a movie writer. And so I went to the USC Film School. I think Doug also went to the USC Film School, and with an eye towards writing movies. And I graduated and was working on movie spec scripts. But at the same time, I had a girlfriend working at the Fox Kids Network in the early 90s. And as many of your listeners or viewers may know, that was a great venue for sort of the rebirth, a renaissance in animation in the 90s. They started doing things like Tiny Toon Adventures, Animaniacs, Batman the Animated Series, and all that stuff. And there was an executive there named Sidney Iwanter, who was in charge of developing a number of those shows. And because it was such a small group of people, I just got to know everyone there by virtue of hanging around with my girlfriend and going to their parties and stuff. And Sidney took a liking to me and encouraged me to read the animation material that was coming in. He'd be Melching, it's a new Batman script. Make yourself a copy. And I'm like, Batman? I love Batman. They're doing a new Batman cartoon. Cool. And I would read the scripts that were coming in by, Alan Burnett and Paul Dini and a lot of those great writers from that show, and Randy Rogel. And I'm reading these scripts and I'm like, these are great. This is so cool. And then the first test animation came back from the animation side, and it was the animation that ended up becoming the main title sequence for the show. And if you're familiar with that, you know how gorgeous that was. So seeing that with that sort of Danny Elfman music and these great scripts, I'm like, this is something special. Like, holy crap, this is amazing. And so Sidney encouraged me to write because he knew I was a writer. So I wrote a Batman spec script because I loved the show. And to this day, the only animation spec I ever wrote was for that show. And unlike a lot of aspiring writers, I finished my animation spec script. So that's key number one. If you're trying to break into the business, finish something so you can have something to show people. So I gave the script to Sidney, and he liked it. He thought it was good. And so he recommended me to Eric Lewald, who was running the new X-Men animated series that hadn't come out yet. And Sidney said, Batman, that's winding down. X-Men is where it's at. And I'm like, X-Men? I love the X-Men. I read the comics all through the 80s. So Eric read my script and thought it was good. So he invited me to pitch story ideas and pitched a story that he liked, and hired me and my then writing partner, Dave McDermott, to write the script, and we did a good job on it, and weren't late and didn't screw it up. And so Eric invited us to submit more ideas, and we ended up doing like 8 or 9 of them for that show for X-Men. And then the way animation is a small community, so Eric would go on to a new show and would bring all of the writers that he had good experiences with along to the new show to work on it. And it's a small enough community that all the story editors and producers kind of talk to each other and say, I'm looking for a writer. Do you have anybody that's good? So we kind of got a reputation as being solid animation writers. So we, through just word of mouth recommendation, our career continued to grow. And I worked for 10 years in animation without an agent or a manager, just strictly by word of mouth. And next thing I knew, I have a full-on career going, closing in on 30 years now in a field that I had no intention of getting into, but it's been really good to me, and I've really had a great time.
And Shaene, what's your break-in story?
Well, to backtrack a little bit, Steve, when you wrote that spec script, you probably had a bunch of live action scripts already, right? A bunch of spec scripts.
Yeah, I had 2 or 3 feature scripts. Yeah.
And they were all probably excellent. And that's kind of with me. I started out in kindergarten. I knew I wanted to be a writer. And I asked my dad, will you publish a book for me? He's like, I don't know how. And that's so I was like, well, I guess I'm gonna go to college for writing and all that stuff. Flash forward, in college I took a screenwriting course and just fell in love with that kind of format, because it's very visual and it's immediate because you're writing it in present tense, and I just fell in love with it, and I'm like, I've got to do this. But I lived in Nebraska at the time. And so,
what part? Where in Nebraska?
Omaha, Nebraska.
Okay, I grew up. I lived in Bellevue.
Bellevue. Okay, great. Yeah,
early 70s.
It's a great place to be from. It's an awesome place.
My mom's from Nebraska, so it's all about Nebraska, apparently.
That's weird. Normally, it's like, Nebraska. Where's Nebraska? So it's.
My dad was stationed at Offutt Air Force Base.
Of course, yeah. And Offutt is the reason why I thought that everybody had tornado warning sirens, because, we'd have the Offutt sirens, the Air Force Base air raid sirens would go on every time there was a tornado. So when we moved to Florida later, I was like, when there was a tornado warning, I'm like, where's the sirens? Well, not everybody has those. But yeah, so, I went to school in Nebraska. I had gotten into a much fancier university. Brown University was my top pick because they had doctorate in in creative writing, and not very many programs had that. But it turned out I didn't have the money, and they offered a full ride, but then they reneged on the first semester. So I'm like, well, you know what? I'm not going to wait. I'll just go to school here, and then I'll go there later. And I ended up liking it, and then I fell in love with that screenwriting class, and then that was it for me. So I'm like, I'll follow my future husband to Florida, but I'm going to be working on screenwriting, and I was writing specs, and mostly a lot of TV specs too at the time. But then you find out you really have to be in California, and maybe it's a little easier now because of virtual stuff, but you have to meet people. It's just like Steve said, word of mouth got passed around about how good he was as a writer. But if he hadn't met all those people in the first place, they wouldn't have known he was a good writer. So, I had gotten a call from, I'm not going to say what show, but they have, the Writers Guild had programs for minorities and women, and men over 40 were considered minorities at the time. So I applied, and you basically just send a letter to a show you're interested in and say, hey, I'm interested in this program. Would you hire me? And they basically hire you like as a writer's assistant or something. And I got a call, and I'm in Florida, and I already had it arranged with my boss. If I get a call on this, I'm flying out to California. I'm going to be there for, I think it was 6 to 14 weeks. I'm going to be there, and I'm going to just drop everything and do it. Is that okay? And she's like, sure, you go right ahead. I got that call, and the guy's like, so when can you be in here today for the interview? There was no virtual stuff back then. So I'm like, I can't be in there today, but I can be there tomorrow. And he's like, oh, everybody we need to talk to you is only here today. So but we have a cycle. We take somebody from a college, then we take somebody not from the college. So we'll call you next cycle. And I knew the show was supposed to be ending at some point. So I had basically asked him, I think I may have called him back and asked him, hey, will the writer's assistant's duties be the same in the next cycle because as they are this cycle, because I know this show's supposed to be ending. He's like, oh yeah, the writer's assistants will help break down scripts. There'll be plenty of scripts to break down. Don't worry about it. You're our top candidate. And I don't know if they just said that to be nice, but it really gave me hope. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. I'm their top candidate. I'm going to call them back in January and I'll still get to do this. And of course, I had no idea how expensive it probably was to be out in California or anything like that. I called them in January and they said, oh, we're sorry, we're out of scripts to break down. So there's no more position. And so then that was when I knew I had to be out in California in order to be able to do this. You had to be able to drop everything at a moment's notice and go. And even if I was there, I literally was ready to have book a flight and be there the next day. So we moved to California. That was my one condition with my husband. Wherever he got to go for his postdoc, he's a psychologist. Like, has to be in California. And so he sacrificed his career a little bit because he had to pick places that were very everybody really wanted to be in the Los Angeles area. He had to contend with a lot of different people to get into Los Angeles. So that was a little rough for him, but he sacrificed and we made it to California. And then again, it's all about who you meet. I happen to meet people more in animation, and I've been doing a lot of thinking about this because there's just so many people I owe my career to. Yes, I had to do the spec work, and in fact, I had several specs. I did a spec for that show. They said, well, we'll have a spin-off show, so call this exact number next time, and maybe you'll get the person you need to talk to, in a couple of months, and you can submit. And so I did, and that person goes, oh yeah, send us a sample. Well, I sent a sample for that show. I wrote a sample specifically because that particular show used to take samples of their show. In fact, people could pitch to that show, just regular everyday people. And so I wrote one, and I came back unopened and said, we don't take unsolicited scripts. I'm like, you asked me for the script. What do you mean unsolicited? But I didn't have an agent at the time. And so that was another reason I figured out I had to be there, because they at that point he's like, oh no, but we don't take scripts for this show anymore. We used to. And that particular script was a finalist in Scriptapalooza, which is one of the bigger contests at the time. Nobody knows about it, but a lot of people do it. So it was a large contest. So that script was decent, but that it wouldn't have helped me in animation, So when I came out here, I started meeting a lot of people in animation, and I needed an animation spec. So until I sat down and actually made myself do that and finished one, as Steve said, I wouldn't have gotten anywhere in animation. And it's funny because people will read you and they can tell you're a good live action writer, but I just think there's a level of commitment you're showing by doing an animation specific script, and there's certain differences between live action and animation, and people don't necessarily want to have to teach you those differences as your story editor, as you're the person in charge of your writing. So if you can show that you can already do that and write it the right way, I think you've got an advantage over other people that way too.
Well, this is bringing up a lot of different questions, so I'm going to have to organize them a little bit here. So firstly, is like both of you have talked about like the necessity of meeting people. Well, the two big things, right, which I also kind of tell people when they ask me for advice, is you need to have some great sample work, right? Like until you can write a sample that looks great, you can meet all the people in the world. It's not going to really help you. But then you also have to meet people to get them to read that sample. And one tip we've had so far is come to California. That's obviously a big one because for both of you that was necessary. Come to LA specifically. California's big. And then, so what, we've had some different ways that you can get in, have a girlfriend that works on the show, I guess is one of them. But
no, before that though, Steve, you had done work, not just script work, but what else had you done before that?
Before I started in animation?
Yeah, you had done some film work, right?
Yeah. Well, when I graduated from USC, I worked on an independent feature and met a guy on that who was working at New Line Cinema. And he got me in for an interview to be an intern at New Line. And I interned for this guy named Mark Ordesky, who has since gone on to be the executive producer of the Lord of the Rings movies. But at the time, we shared this tiny little office in New Line's headquarters, and I would go in 2 or 3 days a week and do interny stuff for him. And then when that internship, and he was great. He's still great. He's an awesome dude. But I got a job working as a PA on some of New Line's fare, including House Party 2, The Pajama Jam. I was PA. I'm actually in House Party 2, The Pajama Jam. If you look very closely, it was filmed at USC, actually. We filmed all our campus scenes at USC, so I was a background extra a couple of times. And then did a bunch. I was a puppeteer at Universal Studios Hollywood on their American Tail 5 Goes West show, where I was part of a team of 3 puppeteers that would manipulate this gigantic, like 17-foot tall Tiger the Cat puppet 5 times a day for the show. And, I did the typical breaking in work, script reader, assistant, that kind of stuff before I was able to get my first writing job. And as Shaene was saying, like meeting people, I'm a really shy person. And it was really difficult for me to meet people, and not only to meet people, but difficult to tell people what I wanted. And that's another important thing, like, let people know what it is that you want to do, because that's how they'll remember you. And if you don't know unless you ask people for something, like I was way too shy to like say, call up Paul Dini and say, hey, Paul, can I take you out to coffee or lunch and pick your brain about breaking in? I never would have done that. And I wish I did, because my career might have gotten along faster than it did. So now I try to make it a point of, making myself available to aspiring writers. A few times a year, I'll go out to lunch or coffee and talk to them.
Hey, Steve, you want to go get coffee?
Yeah, when it's safe to do that, absolutely.
Virtual coffee. I do ice cream. I like to drink black ice.
Yeah.
I gotta say that's like one of the important. One of those things that I wish I knew, because I did my internship when I was still in school, like between my junior and senior year of college. I did my internship at Zoetrope and worked really closely with like Roman Coppola and like a bunch of people that at the time they were just kind of starting out. And I met Francis a few times, but he was off doing his thing mostly. But like I kind of thought like, oh, I'm an intern. My job is to make copies and keep my mouth shut, right? And then like read scripts and do coverage, which they also asked me to do. I think they actually really liked me, but I was kind of too afraid to ever even say like, would you read a script? And this is after working for them for free for 3 months, right? I realized like I totally blew that opportunity. I was right there with this great opportunity to kind of like get in with people that could have helped my career. And after it was over, I just went back to USC for my senior year and didn't really ever follow up. I just blew a big opportunity because I was the same thing. I was too shy. I didn't know what I was supposed to do.
Well, you gotta figure out what's that line between being obnoxious and pushy and being, someone who really wants to learn and be open and try to make the most of an opportunity, I guess, without being obnoxious.
Yeah. One of the things.
I wanted to bring that up, that there's a balance. And to backtrack a little more, the reason why I asked Steve about his experiences, you kind of made it sound like, oh, he just got discovered by being somebody's boyfriend. But that's not really how it works. You're constantly working, and people are seeing you work. And here you are. You're an intern working for free, and they can see you busting your butt. But if you weren't doing a good job at being an intern, and all you were doing is just hanging around the office, then nobody saw you busting your butt. Nobody would have wanted to help you. But once you've been there, and once they've seen you, and they know you, and they know you're working hard, and they can trust you, that's when maybe you could ask them, hey, can I go get coffee or whatever. I don't know if I'd ever ask anybody to read a script. That's a really hard one for me.
And I should say also, at that same time I was writing the spec animation script, I was writing spec movie scripts. And a few months after I wrote my first professional animation script, I sold one of those spec scripts to Paramount for a nice 6-figure sum, and that, I was in all the trades, and so my stock in the animation world suddenly got up. Like, oh, he wrote a movie that a studio bought. We got to hire him some more. So that helped also.
Yeah, and of course that was a different era because that spec market, it just sort of doesn't exist anymore. But yeah, like because and mine got made. Sweet Home Alabama was the same kind of thing, right? Like there was a time where you could just do something, a good script, and actually sell it. And I feel like that doesn't really work anymore that way. But yeah, no, I think Shaene did a very good point because certainly that's been one of the themes of from the various guests is like, you get your break, and usually it seems incredibly lucky, but it's like because you've been doing 100 different things, right? And then the break will come from something else that is a result of those 100 things you did. It never works the way you think it's going to work. So you can't like plan for the break. You just have to be in there kind of doing it, and then it, like things come to you if you're putting out the effort.
And if you're out the right vibe, again, if you are the whiny, complainy type who nobody wants to be around because you bring the room down all the time, that's going to affect you too. So it's hard work. And if you're shy and don't tell people, hey, I'm a writer, that's going to affect you too, because people will be like, oh, I didn't know you were a writer. Maybe I could have hired you as my writer's assistant or whatever.
Absolutely. And what is the saying? Like luck is preparation meets opportunity or something like that. Yeah. So, and it's funny. I grew up in a military family, and my father was a bit of a disciplinarian, and was not. I had no family connections to the entertainment business, but it was something that I realized I wanted to do from a very young age, and so I was gravitated towards all the geek nerdy stuff. So I loved comic books and animation. I played Dungeons and Dragons and, all that kind of stuff back in the 70s and 80s. And that my dad thought was kind of a waste of time. Like he would come home from a day in the Air Force and see me drawing pictures or working on my Dungeons and Dragons campaign as Dungeon Master. And, he would give me grief about, you should be out there hustling and getting a job, at the fast food restaurant or whatever, flipping burgers or whatever. Like, but I don't want to do that. Like, reading comic books and drawing pictures and watching these cartoons. And it was so gratifying that years later, like I make a living doing all this stuff that I loved as a kid. And in some cases it's like, I used to watch the Transformers show. Now I write for the Transformers show, or, I love Star Wars. I had Star Wars posters on my wall, and now I'm writing for Star Wars. And, so it's all that quote unquote preparation, like, but it was, came from a place of love and fandom that I was lucky enough to be able to translate into, practical experience for a career.
Yeah. And that's awesome that we can translate that. I mean, my mom encouraged all that for me, and she even bought me my Dungeons and Dragons set when I was 10. I started playing at 10, but mostly I think that was just, it's a lot of good reading and math and all that stuff, and that she wanted to keep us, busy. Well, she was a single mom for a long time and had to work. So it was very encouraging, and I think I got lucky compared to other people when it comes to that. No one ever said, don't read comics, don't watch. She loved it when we watched cartoons. We'd watch Saturday morning cartoons all the time. And she loved it.
I'm just going to hit on this again. Like Dungeons and Dragons, I'm so happy that game has come back around in such a big way, because it's a terrific way to learn to be a storyteller as a dungeon master, to create stories and that sort of group storytelling that happens in D&D. It's a great training ground for an aspiring writer, and I had no idea at the time, but it's great. So I would encourage people to play D&D
or any role-playing game. My husband and I literally had a mini argument just last night while my daughter was sleeping, like right over the bed, going, hey, what system should we use? We're going to try to play Dungeons and Dragons maybe next weekend, but we can't really use the system because it's a little too complex for her. So why don't we figure out what dice system we should use and things like that? So, because we want her, she loves storytelling, and we want her to learn from that. And yeah, it's helpful. Also, it helps you get along with friends, and it's a good social thing. I was just as shy as you guys. You probably wouldn't believe it. When I came from Florida to California, I was reading books on like how to talk to people. Like how do I come out of that shell? I just had to force myself to get out there and talk to people. And you have to go to networking events and meet people and talk to them.
That's
So
fascinating that you're like, just thinking about it, like a D&D campaign in a way is kind of like a writer's room where you've got your showrunner as the DM, and then you've got the other members of the team, and you're collectively telling this story, and you're collaborating, and you're trying to solve problems. And like, that's a really great social training ground for a writer's room.
yeah, I don't think it's an accident that a lot of writers of this generation played Dungeons and Dragons, right? And I never really thought about that, but like it's actually more applicable to the TV process where you're working more collaborative, and then feature where you're kind of usually going off on your own to write. I also don't want to blow by Shaene. You made a really good point about like being good at whatever you're doing, and I'm a big believer in that. Is like if you get an internship or a PA job or something, you don't go in the first day and say, "Hey guys, can you help me out?" Right? You go in there and show them. Yeah, you're right. You go in there and show them you're the best as intern or PA that they have, and then like on your last day, you say like, "Hey,
can we get coffee or can I?"
Yeah. So yeah, because I think that's a big mistake people make. I also think it shows it's just an element of character, right? Like if you put your energy into being a great PA, then they know you're going to put your energy into being a great writer.
Right.
And it also goes to what he was saying about loving the material, right? Like it's a genuineness there that you can't sort of like fake loving stuff, right?
Don't go into these jobs thinking you're better than the job or putting out that attitude that you're slumming it or whatever. Like, no, you're a PA, you're an intern, you get the coffee, you make the Xeroxes, and you don't complain about it, and you make the best damn coffee you can make, and you make those Xeroxes, and they're nice and straight, and the staples are perfect. Like, you don't screw around in those jobs. You got to show that you're a team player and that you're competent.
And what you're doing affects everybody else too. It's necessary to be good at it.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason why they have someone to get coffee for people, right? Because they want those people working in the writer's room and not getting their own coffee. So you're part of the team, whether you kind of think of it that way or not.
Well, if you've ever had a writer's assistant write something down, or like somebody, we did a little story break, and the writer's assistant wrote down the ending wrong, and I'm looking at it going, did they change that after it? Like what happened? And so I had to go to the story editor and go, is this right? And they're like, oh no, they just wrote it down wrong. If you're not doing your job right, you cause more problems for, like, I could have written that wrong. I could have just like gone, okay, I'll write the ending this way, not checked. And then the story editor be like mad at me, like, why the heck did you change that ending, Shaene? So if you're not doing your job right, and accidents happen obviously, but
So let's think about or talk a little bit about advice for someone that's coming to LA with the aspirations of being an animation writer, and they have to go out and meet people, and they're shy or they're not shy, but like, where do you go? You land in LA, you don't know anybody, which I think was probably true of all of us. Although at least Steve and I had the advantage of being at a film school in LA where we came out of school knowing some people. But yeah, like, what do you do if you don't know anybody?
Join organizations?
Yeah, like organizations, events. Where would you go to kind of meet and network?
Well, obviously, one of the big ones is conventions. San Diego Comic Con, Anaheim WonderCon, LA Comic Con. There's so many conventions now, and usually those.
I was going to interrupt and say Long Beach Comic Con is one of those small ones where you can talk to people. It's really cool.
Exactly, and most of those cons are, especially in the LA area, are able to get professional guests to come down and do panels and stuff. And so it's much easier to at least, be able to get a few moments with somebody in your field to sort of catch them after a panel and give them a card or see if you can take them to coffee or something afterwards. And that's a great place to hear conversation about, or be part of these, panels and get answers to questions and whatnot.
My friend Joe brought up a really good thing. He had his career had just started moving. He had worked for Henson, and he had broken off. He'd made their comic book imprint, and I think it was just about the time he'd broken off and started doing his own, like he was consulting and doing stuff like that. And so his strategy was he would go up to the panelists afterwards, introduce himself, and tell them the cool thing he was working on. Because while he's working on this stuff that they're in love with, maybe it was Transformers at the time or something like that, and that would get their attention, and that also made him stand out in their mind a little more. So when he asked, hey, can we get coffee sometime? And they could follow up and say, hey, I'm Joe, I'm the one working on X. So it also made him look like he's doing something already. He's not just coming to you because, you can do something for him. And I think that works a little bit too. So you shouldn't be afraid to approach people at a Comic-Con. And if you have something like that you can share with them without being too pushy, like this is what I'm doing, it's all about me, blah blah blah. I think that helps a little bit. I liked his style; it was very cool.
I think there's an advantage of being kind of like the fan first, and then this help me out second, for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
My little.
I was just like, didn't we meet at Comic-Con, Doug? San Diego Comic-Con.
I think so. Yeah, possibly at the Writers Guild Animation Caucus party. But I think maybe either through mutual friends or something like that.
We just ran into each other. I think we were probably with Eugene at the time or something.
Yeah, probably Eugene, who was on this podcast a couple months ago. So, yeah. And the other thing, my little tip for that, if you can find, like, there's a lot of crossover right between animation and comic books. So sometimes I find it's like you can really strike up conversations with people if they're in a booth. So if you have an animation writer or whatever kind of writer that also is working on a comic book and is going to be in one of the booths, you can find out when they're going to be there signing or something like that. Obviously if they're working for Marvel or DC, there's a giant line, you'll get no time, but small little indie press booths, you could just go usually talk to people for a while, and it's a little more forgiving than when they're kind of rushed at the end of a panel by 100 fans trying to get their attention.
That's a really good point.
Absolutely. And you brought up another organization, the Writers Guild Animation Writers Caucus, that Shaene and I are both longtime members of, and also members of the steering committee. And we're kind of on hiatus right now because of the pandemic, like everything. But you can join the caucus once you've written a piece of produced animation. It just takes 1/2 hour to getting associate membership in the Writers Guild. But we do, the caucus does do a regular dinner every month that's open to non-members, to aspiring.
Pre-pandemic.
Yeah. Hopefully, maybe in 2021 or 2022, we'll be able to get back to it. But that's a great place where we would meet, we'd alternate between the city side and the valley side. And we just have a schmooze dinner with, anywhere from 15 to 40 people. And we always have a guest speaker from the world of animation. It might be a writer or a producer or a director or actor or voice director, agent, from musician, from like all the different aspects of production. And that's an opportunity to ask questions of them, and also just be in a room with a couple dozen other professional and aspiring writers to ask questions and make contacts. And I think writers groups are another good thing. You can try to get involved in a writers group, sort of a support group, and be able to share your work and get critiques.
Oh yeah, people see your work and they know it's good, and then they can invite you on to projects that they get on, or they can see it really bad. I brought like really bad work in progress stuff before. So, it's supposed to be so you can do that, right? But so you got to be careful what you bring.
Well, I think another thing about the whole networking, this is another real peeve of mine about the way that kind of outsiders or aspiring people, outsiders is probably the wrong word, because there's no outside or inside really.
Everyone's outside. Everyone's outside. Everyone's an outsider. You're always breaking in.
Yeah. But let's say some aspiring person, you're trying to figure out how to do this. The advice of networking, I think there's a misimpression of like you go to an event and you pigeonhole someone and get them to give you a job, and it's like that's just not really the way it works. That networking is really about building relationships, long-term relationships, and so you're just kind of like, it's not like it's going to happen in one event, right? You can't just go to one networking event and make your career. It's you meet some people and then you see them again and again, and you meet other people through them, and it just sort of like you develop friendships. Really, that's what networking kind of is.
And yeah, to call back, it's like, when you do meet people, whether it's an executive or a producer or a story editor or showrunner, you obviously want to make a good impression, and you just never know, what the timing is going to be. You want to be able to take advantage of an opportunity when it comes up. That's where that preparation comes in, so that if you have that material that you can send someone. Back when I was getting started, I don't know if you did this, Doug, you would always keep physical copies of your scripts in the trunk of your car. Yeah. So if you ran into someone, you could like go to your car and hand them a copy of your script. Like now you could just email them a PDF, but you want to have that material to give to someone when they ask for it.
Right. But like let them ask too was one of the
Yeah,
things. Is like
and
don't say like, oh, nice to meet you. Here's my script. Like
and it's not going to happen at like a party. Like they're not going to say, "Can I read your script?" the first time you meet them. It might the third time you see them. Especially if you've got something else going on, they might ask. It happened to me once. I had a guy that I didn't know that well, but I loved his work, and we got to talking a lot. And after about the third or fourth time I saw him at a party, he's like, he wanted to know if I was the real deal or not. And so he asked. He's like, "You have a script I can read?" And I'm like, "Sure."
yeah,
I didn't give it to him right then. I didn't have it in my trunk. I emailed it to him.
And this
yeah,
might sound like common sense, but when you do get that opportunity, don't blow it. Like, do the work, do good work on time. And you'd be surprised, and be easy to work with. You'd be surprised how many people just can't manage that. So it's super important to like, don't argue, give them what they're asking for, and just do the work and make their jobs easier. I always felt as a freelancer and a young writer, like my job was to make my boss's job easier, like to give them good material on time so that they're not stressing and waiting for something, or something comes in and it's like amateur, it's like, it's not good, so it's.
yeah. And actually, so I want to get into some of the creative questions, but before I do, I think it might be worth just talking a little bit about the way, I guess we call it the lifestyle of the television animation writer, and because it works a little different sometimes in live action. I mean, I know there are writers' rooms in some shows, but then there's also freelancing, which really doesn't happen anymore in live action. So you want to just talk about maybe a little bit about like how the business works, like how you work in the business. Shaene, do you want to go first on that one?
A quick addendum to what Steve was saying. Do the work. You also have to do the follow up. Like, you do have to send them the script. don't freak out, not send them the script. And then you also have to follow up, and don't do it like a week later. A month later, check in with them, and maybe another month after that. People may not have a chance to read, and they don't have time and stuff. So try to treat the best way to act in Hollywood is to treat people the way you want to be treated. You don't want somebody coming up to you going, "Hey, read my script. Please read my script." That you're gonna be like, "Whoa, that person's weird." You just treat people the way you want to be treated, and be a friend, and then people will be friends to you. Sorry, now I forgot the question.
Like what's the lifestyle like? How does your business model work, I guess, as a writer?
Well, pretty much you look at the blank screen and you cry, and then you look at them, and then you go do something else for a little while, and you look at the blank screen, and then yeah, I mean, there's a lot of procrastination involved in being a writer in some ways. I mean, I'm joking in a lot of ways, but procrastination is a good way to think about things and let things percolate in your head. So you should go for walks and all that stuff. For like professional, like when you're not just sitting down and doing your own stuff, it usually happens like someone will recommend you for something because they've seen that your work is good, or they've heard somebody mention your work is good, or you posted you were nominated for a award or something like that. And so you should use social media, by the way, and learn how to use it well. I don't know how to use it well, but I try. But anyway, so somebody will come up to you and they'll say, "Hey, I have a possible gig for you. Are you interested?" And then you'll be like, "Sure." I haven't turned down a lot of gigs. There's been a couple that maybe they wouldn't be a good fit, or it's too busy, but that doesn't happen a lot. And then they'll go back and they'll pitch your name to their boss or whatever, and hopefully they'll agree, and you'll get a write on this show. There's two different methods in animation that I've run into. First, well, there's a lot more than that, but there's two different ways the show might work that I've been on. Now there's other shows and other ways they work. You could be completely freelance, which is they just, you don't ever come in really. You might do everything over email even, or you might just come in for a quick meeting or something like that. Or you could have, it's like a staff, but it's in animation. It's short. It's usually like, we call it a summit, and you come in maybe for a summit with a group of writers, and you'll pitch ideas and kind of develop the show a little bit, develop the season. And that's a lot of fun because you get to work with other creative people, and you're bouncing ideas off of people, and it's brainstorming. If you've ever been in a brainstorming session, that's a lot of what it is. And there'll be somebody that's in charge that will kind of help that brainstorming along. And when it works, it works beautifully. It's so wonderful. So then there's staff, which I've never been on a show that's like a full staff, like say a Disney show where you're you come every morning and you're there every day, and you're sitting maybe across the aisle from some artists that are working at Disney and stuff. I've never actually done that. I've done short staff where we go in for like 2 weeks. We have our summit, and then we break off and we all write kind of individually, or we go in and talk to the story editor a little bit and break down the story, and then we go off and write individually. I mean, writing is a lone pursuit in a lot of ways. You can do most of it by yourself once you got started, and hopefully you're not bothering the story editor a lot so they can get their work done. So once you get started, you're off on your own, and so you have to be able to work on your own. You have to be responsible enough to do that. And if that's not, if you can't work on your own and you can't work with other people, then this may not be quite the industry for you. You have to be able to be good with other people. You can't just be like some people are like, oh, I could just be at my desk all day and not ever talk to people. It's a very it's an industry that requires a lot of interaction with people and working with people in the correct ways. Like Steve was saying, you don't say, you don't fight. Like somebody says, I want this to happen in the story. Yes, give them your ideas and say, well, what if we did this instead? Or here's the advantages of this, but you don't go, no, my way is the only way to do it. You can't be like that. You got to be easy to work with. So those are I haven't done a full staff. Steve, you've done full staff, right?
Yeah, well, when I started in the business, the glory days of the studio staff was winding down. It used to be, Warner Brothers had a building full of writers, or Disney had a building full of writers, and they would just assign them to whatever shows they were making. So they were just regular employees that just worked on whatever they were making at the time. And that was winding down. And so when I started, it was primarily 100% freelance model, where there would just be a story editor who was like the writing showrunner in charge of the writing, and the story editor would contract out to freelancers. And it was rough, man. I'll tell you, in those days, you were pitching ideas to the story editor. So you'd send them like 4 to 6 paragraphs of, ideas.
For free.
And you'd hope that they would buy one of them.
And they always pick the one that you threw in the last minute as a Hail Mary. Like all the ones you love, they don't pick, they pick that one, and then you have to work hard to make that one work.
Yeah, so sometimes I'd like put them in a different order, like, so I put the one I really like last to like, or so like maybe they'll, but yeah, these like. Is
there a secret? Did it work to do that one last?
No, they always seem to hone in on the one that you're the least excited about. Like, yeah, let's do that one. Like, oh, great, let's do it. But you would have no guarantee of getting an assignment at the end of it, and that's kind of changed. I think most story editors now, if they ask you to pitch some ideas, like whenever I've done that, I would always guarantee a script. So whether it's one of yours or one that I give you, you will get
on the show. If they can give you one, they will. But there's some that are just bake-offs that they have the pitch as possible, and then if you get one, you get one.
Yeah, but then over time, thankfully, that model in large part has fallen away. So it seems like most shows are what Shaene described that I've worked on. It's sort of a freelance staff where there'll be a head writer or story editor and maybe a number 2 person that's on staff. And then they would kind of use the same group of 4 or 5 writers. They weren't being paid weekly, but they would get regular assignments on the show, and they would bring in that staff for summits where anywhere from usually 2 to 3 days. On the Star Wars shows, we would do 3-day summits up at Skywalker Ranch, and we would fly up there and break 5 or 6 stories during those 3 days. On the Marvel shows, we usually just did 2 days. We'd break like 6 stories in 2 days in their windowless conference room with our little mini staff of freelancers. But recently I've been on a couple shows where we did have a full staff of writers on the show getting paid a weekly rate and just going to a writer's room every day for months, or most every day for months, and working on every single story together.
And just to be clear, when you're not being paid an hourly rate, you're being paid per script. And there's different steps in the script. There's like, for example, you might have to write the premise, which is a more detailed pitch of what's going to happen. And then you write an outline, which is, it's not an outline the way you would do them in school. It's more like a narrative outline. It's like writing a story. And for most of the shows that I've worked on, they're super detailed. It's almost as if you're writing the script in a novel form. And then you write the script in a script form. And there might be a couple extra pages to work with once you've copied the novel and put it into a regular script form, but not that many. So, and then you're working it until it's a good draft. And there's another draft. So you get paid per step. And it's usually like, maybe it's half before the step and half after the step. But I usually don't have time to bill a lot, so I'll just bill everything at the end.
Yeah. So let's then we're kind of shifting into some of the creative challenges, and very back at the beginning, I think it was Shaene that mentioned the difference between writing for animation versus live action, and that you have to know that. So you guys, I mean, without like not necessarily specific format things, but what are the considerations that you have to have that are animation specific as you're writing an episode of an animated show?
Let's have Steve go first because he's been at this longer.
Well, I mean, all film, all visuals, it's all a visual medium, but animation perhaps more so. So I found in animation, we tend to be, although it's changed over time. When I started, a half-hour animation script was about 34 to 36 pages, and we would describe shot by shot in all the ways they tell you not to write scripts in film school. Don't direct on the page, except in animation when direct on the page. That's certain studios have different needs for that. Like Lucasfilm just wants, it's almost like a live action script because they want their directors to really do the directing. Other shows want more detail, so you can do shot by shot stuff. I find that really tedious.
But you write it so well. I've seen scripts for shows like that, and I love it. And I've fallen in love with that particular style because of reading scripts from those shows. And I did get to look at one of yours, and it was fantastic, and I love it. And now there's a hybrid where you're kind of writing shot by shot, but you're implying it by just capitalizing the thing that you're seeing and things like that.
Yeah, that seems to be that's my style that I like. It's like kind of a hybrid. Yeah, so it's more detail than I might write in a live action script, but less than in the old days of, close up, Wolverine, unleashes his claws, reverse angle, blah, blah, blah,
Yeah. I had trouble. I used a reverse, as I said, reverse to reveal. And I had trouble with a recent studio. They didn't know what that meant. I had to actually go through and find a film school thing to show them what a reverse shot was. It's like it's just you're looking at the person and then you're looking at the other person that they're looking at. It's not that big of a deal.
But there's also the practical things in animation. There are some things that animation does better than other things, and there's this misconception that in animation the only limitation is your imagination, and that's not necessarily true. Like animation shows have budgets just like anything else, and we have limits on, especially on a CGI show, you have pretty severe limitations on introducing new characters or new locations. So like, you might only have the budget to have 2 new characters in your episode. So, and
then explain that why?
Because in animation, like in live action, every character has to be designed. Every character has to be built in 3D and rigged, and and all the things that go into making that a model that can act, like have facial expressions and all that sort of thing.
Cast.
And
even if you're doing 2D, you have to cast them and stuff.
Yeah, you're still paying. You're still paying an actor to voice the character. So you have all those same budgetary. Everything that you see has to be designed and built, just like in live action. It's maybe in some ways cheaper, but it's still, our budgets aren't as high. So, so you have to be cognizant of the production limitations of your show and be responsible in that way. And then there are things that certain media does better than others, like interactions with water is a big one. In CGI, it's a real expensive pain in the ass to have characters interact with water. whereas in 2D, that's not an issue. So it's really important to know those kinds of things and to go into your stories knowing that and sort of design them to play to the strengths of the medium. Because otherwise you're just asking for disappointment. You know, it's just going to come back and it's not going to be as good because it's just not producible in that way.
One I just found out this year, some animated characters are designed so that their arms aren't long enough to reach their hats. So you can't have them actually take their hat off and put it back on. Never noticed that until this year.
Well, and that's a big deal. Like in CGI, usually like their costume pieces are part of the build of the character. So, you know, like you can't have someone like we were doing a Star Wars thing where, you know, in the script it was like the character takes off their gun belt. You can't really do that. You can't have them take off their gun belt because it's part of their texture of their body. So you'd have to make a whole new body without the gun belt, and then you'd have to like do some cutting away, and you know, and then you have to build the gun belt as a separate prop. So you know, but whereas in 2D, it's totally easy. You can just have to do a costume change. It's
you still can't, and they can't reach. So you have to like cut to, you know, close up of the hand coming, getting, you know, they have to
exactly.
It's fun.
Yeah, all the cheats, like a lot of stuff is doable, but there's some things just like, you know, don't write the scene where something, especially if it's not important, don't write it in such a way that it's going to be a challenge or an expensive problem for production.
Yeah, I worked at Disney Feature Animation when they were basically in that time period where they're transitioning from hand drawn to CG, and I didn't have it wasn't a creative job as a tech coordinator, but it was. I remember they struggled a lot with creating a 3D Mickey Mouse or a CG Mickey Mouse because his ears are designed to always be a certain way no matter which way his head is turned, which is really easy to do in 2D, but in CGI that's a challenge. How do you design the model so that the ears don't kind of flatten out as he turns his head? So things you don't think about unless you know the animation side of things for sure.
Yeah, and something on the writing part on scripts, you're writing in every effort. Like, so voice actors are an amazing breed of actors. Like, you have actors, right? And you would think, oh, well, you know, your big famous actors could do voice acting. Not necessarily, because there's something to being able to make it sound like this person's climbing while they're doing it when you're not actually climbing, or make it sound like they're muffled. You know, I was just in a session, I'm like, well, maybe if you put your hand over here, they're like, no, that they won't be able to hear us. They're like, oh, but I could do one finger. No, it sounds like I'm muffled and you can hear me better, you know. And it's little stuff like that that you wouldn't even think about, but these guys have had to think about it, and they've made it a beautiful art.
But yeah, professional voice actors, it's like they don't have the tools that like an on-camera actor has. They don't have their physicality or costume or
have a wall in front of them to climb.
Yeah, it's their entire performance has to be crunched down into their voice. And that's a real talent that a lot of brilliant on-camera actors just don't have. They just can't do it. It just doesn't sound good. And we've had to recast a couple of times over the years with like somebody like really excited about having him in, and the performance just lays there on tape. And then you get some of these professional voice actors that just really make stuff come alive. And yeah, there's a real art to these efforts, whether it's like fighting efforts or climbing efforts or whatever. And this guy, he's an on-camera actor, Diedrich Bader.
Yes, love him.
He's great. He did Batman and Batman the Brave and the Bold, but he was so good at those efforts. He was so funny when Batman would get hit. You're like, ugh. He's so good at it.
Yeah, so, and it's we have to write those in as writers. You have to know how to write them in. So that's one difference between a live action script. And you know, I found that somebody who was on staff, I think at Disney recently, you know, I was in a writers group, and they recently told me, you know, that's too many efforts. You're writing it like it's a shooting script. I'm like, this is how we write it in freelance. You always write the efforts in. And now that I've been running a story editor show, and I've been sitting in on all the voice acting, I've noticed a lot of efforts are getting missed. Even even mine. Oh my gosh. You know, you don't even think about every single effort. And so the guy who's voice directing is like adding in efforts in there. And then after they've done some of the animation, the rough animation, or what they call an animatic, they're realizing, oh, you know what, it would be really good to have a reaction here. Let's put an effort over, let's put a reaction here. and we're even missing those, even when we're doing full, the best we can do with efforts. So, uh, so there's a lot that you really kind of need to think about when you're doing a animation
Yeah,
script.
that seems to be, yeah, in the old days, you would write in every single effort into a script to make sure that they were covered. But now it seems more often they'll just do full ADR sessions and just pick up a lot of that stuff later once they decide. Because sometimes you might record an effort and it just doesn't work with how it's directed or boarded. So like, yeah, that's too big for that.
Too
Let's
long, yeah.
too long. Yeah, too
Or
long.
or it's open mouth and they want a closed mouth or whatever. Yeah.
So where would someone go to kind of like learn this part of the business? Because you guys learned a lot of it, I guess, by experience, right, of seeing their voice recording sessions and so forth. But someone who is trying to break in and writing their spec script, how would they learn about
You
it?
have to get a hold of, of scripts, of actual animation scripts. I happen to have a friend that helped me with that, and I don't know how else you do it. It's easier now. You can get them online, but they're not as easy to find as like a live action script for sure. I think you can get some Batman scripts, Batman Brave and the Bold. I think the pilot maybe is out there.
Um,
Or it might be a different one. There's
Yeah,
Batman animated.
the good news is this stuff is easier to find than ever. Like Shaene was saying, online it's relatively easy to get good sample scripts, and on a podcast like this one, there's a lot of podcasts and things like that you can listen to get some insight into the process. And there was occasions where an aspiring writer will get in touch with me and ask to read something that I've written. And if it's old enough, and say, like, there's some shows I'm just not going to give out scripts for because
Yeah.
the studios are very sensitive about it. So like, don't ask me for a Star Wars script. I can't give those out. They're very protective of that material. But older stuff, I'm happy to send a PDF file so you can see the style and the formatting and that sort of thing. That's how I learned. I learned from being invited into the files at Fox Kids, and I had literally giant stacks. I copied every single Batman the Animated Series script that came in and brought it home and read it, and so that was my library. That's how I learned the sort of the grammar of writing animation scripts. So I'm really thankful for that opportunity, because that's like getting to read some of the best stuff out there, in that raw form.
One other sort of, I guess, creative related question. A lot of the shows you guys are working on, Steve, particularly you, like based on these big franchises like Marvel, DC, Star Wars. How does that come into play? Like, is canon a big issue for you? I'm sure it is for the fans. So, Steve, why don't you take that?
Yes, canon. Yeah, I've had the good fortune to work on a lot of shows that have huge fan followings and very devoted fan followings. And as a fan myself, I get it. I understand wanting to know that all the stories fit together and you're being respectful of everything that came before. And on the shows that I've worked on, we try to do that as much as possible. There's a certain point when it's just unsustainable that a franchise will collapse under the weight of its own continuity. Because I don't envy the people at Star Trek, after the original series and then the original animated series and like 177 episodes of Next Generation and 170 some episodes of Deep Space Nine and 170 episodes of Voyager and seasons of Enterprise and everything else. Like, how in the God's name do you keep all that stuff straight? And
Well, and isn't that why Crisis on Infinite Earths happened? I mean, kind of, Marv Wolfman decided we're going to fix this continuity problem that we have with all of the DC stuff.
exactly. And continuity is great, and that makes it for a really rich universe for a fan to immerse yourself in. But as a storyteller, it can be really limiting. And so, like, on Star Wars, for example, George Lucas decided that he wasn't going to be beholden to any continuity that wasn't from his movies or his TV shows. So that was called G-level canon, George-level canon. So only at the time, the 6 movies and the Clone Wars animated series counted. So all the comics and novels and video games, it's all great and a lot of fun, but we weren't going to say like, well, we can't tell this story because in this Marvel comic from 1982 they did this thing. We might pluck bits and pieces from that as a nod towards that continuity, and if we liked it, we would incorporate it. Like, for example, in Star Wars Rebels, we knew we wanted to bring in a new antagonist, a sort of a Rommel character on the Imperial side. So we thought, what about Grand Admiral Thrawn? It's an awesome character that appeared in those Timothy Zahn novels. And so we brought in that character, and we talked to Timothy about it too. And we tried to be as faithful to Timothy's creation of that character as we could be within the context of our show, without contradicting anything that he had overtly contradicting anything. And so that is one example. And in Transformers Prime, there was a lot of Transformers continuity at that point. I think there were maybe 11 or 12 previous animated series, but we just had to start over. And our marching orders was, don't contradict the Michael Bay movie directly. And we had to be, we couldn't contradict this novel that they had written, that they decided was going to be sort of the foundation of their new Transformers chronology. So we had kind of a clean slate there, thankfully.
But you guys still paid a lot of homage to the original stuff. I mean,
we outright stole stuff. I mean, we took stuff from stuff that we liked. And, and in the case of Transformers, and also at Lucasfilm, they have a story group. And we had this great guy, Pablo Hidalgo, who's an incredible repository of deep knowledge of Star Wars storytelling in all its forms. So he would sit in on all of our writers' summits and all of our creative meetings. And if we were going to in danger of contradicting canon, he would speak up and explain why. Or if we were trying to solve a problem, he had this, I'm pretty good with my Star Wars knowledge, but Pablo is kind of next level. And so he could bust out some great solutions and say like, in Shadows of the Empire, there was this, like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. We can adapt that thing from the past and for our show. So that's kind of a whole new job description now, as lore keeper.
Blizzard has one of those, at least one. I'm sure there's more than one, but I've met one from Blizzard.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I just to speak to all those fans out there, there is no writer that's walking in on a project going, I hate this project. I don't like Transformers. I'm going to ruin it as much as I can. Nobody's doing that. They get hired because they have a love for that particular thing, or they're good at that particular thing, and they're going to fall in love with it. And they want to do the best job that they can do. Nobody's trying to ruin your childhood. It's important to understand that we're just doing our best.
Yeah, I always walked in, one of my early jobs in high school, I worked at a VHS rental store back in the days when we rented videos. And I was reshelving movies one day, and I was putting this one movie like, oh my God, I can't believe someone rented this piece of crap. And my boss said, every movie in this store is somebody's favorite movie. And that stuck with me after all these years. So even when I would get hired on a show, sometimes it's just a job, because you need to work, and this is a profession, and it may be material that, it's like, it's not my first choice, but I know that this show is going to be somebody's favorite show. It's going to be really important to somebody. So I've always felt it's my responsibility as a writer to do the best job that I can on this show, and take it as seriously and give it my best efforts. And I think you have to be responsible like that as a writer on this stuff, or you're just not going to make it. You have to respect the material.
Yeah, people who don't do that don't get hired again. They just simply don't.
Yeah. And Shaene, from your background, you're working with a franchise, Hello Kitty, and so that is a YouTube show, right? And you've also worked on a Netflix show. Do you want to talk a little bit about the kind of changing market of animation, or I guess we could call it that?
Nobody knows. It's all changing. It's kind of it's really exciting in some ways. There's kind of a pendulum a lot of times on the types of animation that's being done, the types of shows that are being done, like for example comedy versus action and things like that. And comedy will tend to be shorter and action will tend to be longer, right? Well, now it's short form. A lot of YouTube shows And my daughter will watch YouTube, and I mean, she'll watch longer form shows, but she really enjoys YouTube. And she's got a friend who will only watch Octonauts and YouTube shows, and he likes the short form, and that's all he'll do. And he's 5, he'll be 6 soon. So yeah, it's I think internet's taking over, and it's not all short form, but there's more opportunity for short form. So we're doing these 3-minute shorts, and 3 minutes is really tough to tell a story in. It's a lot of hard work, but it's fantastic. It really exercises your creativity and your story skills, and you keep people's attention for that long, and it's so much fun. So we're working with these characters that have been around for forever, and I'm working with a team at Sanrio that, I mean, you see these happy characters behind me. These guys live this. I mean, they are really that happy. And I was just saying before we actually started that working with these guys has been a joy. And in the pandemic, I couldn't think of a better place to be working, because it's these people have this attitude. They're excited to work on this. They're happy. They just have a very positive attitude, and they just want to make it the best show that they possibly can. And it's been an honor to work with these characters because of the people I'm working with, not just because of the characters. And I think these guys have a really good fan base. Whereas, I've heard there are some toxic fan bases out there that are really hard to work with for certain, long-term franchises, especially the ones that have a lot of continuity issues and things like that. But I think maybe that there's this fan base might be just as fun as the characters. So it's been great. It's a little bit difficult because we had to figure out some things about the characters that didn't exist before, but fortunately there's a woman named Cindy Slothy, and she did all that work really before I got there. And they were counting on me to be like, here, help us with this. And I'm looking at it going, this is really good. You did most of my work for me. So it was fantastic, and walking in there. And she had some prior experience working at animation companies. So in the marketing department, and that's one of the differences, I think, is I'm working with a marketing department, and people are probably like, oh, so you're making commercials. No, these guys marketing people tell stories. They tell stories in short form, and that's what a lot of commercials are, is you got to tell a story. And so these guys are fantastic at it. So I don't know, I used to work in marketing departments. I used to work on web pages. So I know how marketing works, and I know how fantastic marketing people are. And I can see some cynical people going, oh, you're working with a marketing department, it's a toy show and you're trying to sell toys. That's not what we're doing. We're telling stories about these awesome characters, and they're super magical. So I think I'm really excited. It's coming out at the end of October. First episode should be October 26th. And I don't know, I guess I just did a commercial for for our show, but working with this brand, you couldn't go wrong in a lot of ways, because it's just such a happy, good brand, and they know what they're doing. The marketing people are very protective of their stuff, but yet they know that to tell a good story, you need to have a little conflict. Like, for example, some shows, preschool especially, and earlier 80s shows, they can't have the characters have any conflict, and they can't have any, it has to be all natural disasters and stuff like that. And you're like, well, how do you, in real life, people have conflict with one another. How do you tell a story? So, I mean, there's not a lot of that because we only have 3 minutes, but I didn't have to worry about them, having unreasonable requests or things like that. They were super reasonable, wonderful to work with, and just a great brand. So I'm really looking forward to that, to seeing it out there.
And I would say, this is a really exciting time for animation, because as Shaene pointed out, there's more outlets than ever before. Like, Shane's over there on YouTube, and we've got Netflix and Hulu and HBO Max and Adult Swim, and it's really great that animation, I think the stigma of adults watching animation has largely fallen away. Like, when I got started in the early 90s, most, animation was for kids, strictly for kids, or maybe college, high school or college maybe, or some weirdo adults, whatever. But now, like, we have this whole generation that's grown up with quality animation, like, that kind of, I think, started at Fox Kids.
X-Men. Yeah, X-Men.
Yeah, X-Men and Batman and The Tick and Animaniacs and all these great shows that's, like, really smart, well-written stuff, but also very handsomely produced with good acting and the whole 9 yards. So we have a whole generation of people in their, their 30s and 40s that grew up with this stuff, and they're still watching. And now we're starting to make animation for that market. The show that I worked on that's coming out, it hasn't been announced yet, and it doesn't even have a title yet. The title keeps changing, but it's coming early next year, is a TV MA show on Netflix. It's totally for grown-ups. And the show I'm working on now is probably, I used to call it a TV 15. It's kind of a sophisticated show for like older teenagers. And that's great. It's great that stigma is gone. It used to be maybe you could watch The Simpsons. It was okay to watch The Simpsons or Family Guy or something like that. But now there's all these great anime shows and original animes and sophisticated comedies, whether it's a BoJack Horseman or those kind of shows. There's something for everyone out there, and it's super exciting.
And part of that is driven, I think, by the streamers and having shows that are in non-traditional formats. And especially like now, we can have long story arcs that go across different episodes. Like it used to be for the longest time, you didn't know what order shows would be airing in and things like that. So they didn't want a lot of stories that had long arcs. Even like as recently as like Firefly, I remember hearing that didn't get a lot of it didn't find its feet right away because it didn't air in the right order, and people were like kind of confused as to what was going on. And
yeah, the serialized storytelling that's really taken hold in TV drama over the last 30 years has really started to go into animation, where in Star Wars Rebels we basically had it was a pretty serialized show, but towards the end it was just one episode led right into the next. Like the whole 4th season is basically one story, and the shows I'm working on now are very serialized, and because it's Netflix,
you can binge watch them all.
Chunk. I'm sorry?
Yeah, you can binge watch them. You don't have to watch them out of order.
Exactly. You'll get that whole chunk of however many episodes it is, 6 or 8 or 10, and you can watch as many of them as you want and really get that serialized long form storytelling. If you want
comics, technically too, like you could download an earlier issue. You don't have to have, you don't have to kind of catch up and figure out. So comics even are able to have more of a long-term story, I think.
Well, that seems like a good note, hopeful, happy note to end the podcast on. So thank you guys for coming. And,
thanks for having us.
And thanks everyone for joining us today. If you like what you heard, please subscribe by clicking on the button to the lower right. I hope you'll join us next month for more schmoozing about writing.